Can you smell that in the air? The Christmas cheer and the joy of a new year just around the corner. It's enough to make you sick. Yeah, I'm tired of being Mr. Positive all the time. Call me the Grinch, because today we're talking about the dark side of Christmas. The forgotten things which hide in the shadow cast by jolly old Saint Nick. Krampus, Gremlins, reindeer hunters, and killers in Santa suits. If you saw my video where I recapped and reviewed every Halloween movie, this will be like that one, but with a curated selection of Christmas horror movies. I'll recap and review each of them to rekindle your holiday spirit, then stomp it into the ground. We'll start with a true classic from director Bob Clark. No, not A Christmas Story. Earlier in his career, Clark focused on horror movies, and one of them was 1974's Black Christmas, originally released in the United States as Silent Night, Evil Night. Not only is this possibly the first true Christmas horror movie, but many consider it the first true slasher movie. Psycho came out 14 years earlier, but this movie solidified the structure that was used by so many slashers in the 80s and beyond, including Halloween, which came 4 years later and kicked off the slasher craze. With that, let's get into the recap, but first, I want to give you a little Christmas cheer before we spend the rest of this video digging through coal. A lot of you are probably stressed out trying to figure out the best gift you can get for loved ones this holiday season. Well, worry no more, because One Take is here to save the day, as always. I hate my wallet. I've always hated it. It's big, bulky, and uncomfortable to carry around. And I've tried slimmer ones, but they're so small they end up being annoying to use. Today, all that changes because I finally found a wallet that's super slim without losing functionality. In fact, it can actually do more than your average wallet. This is Exter's Parliament Wallet, and it is awesome. You can access your cards with a click of a button. How cool is that? You can store cash using this strap or in any of the pockets. And if you lose your wallet, you can find it with this trackable card by pairing it with your phone. The wallet also blocks RFID to prevent wireless theft. It comes in 6 colors, and it's made of environmentally certified premium leather. The Exter wallet is the perfect gift, and they're having a big sale now up to 50% off, plus an extra 5% by using my code ONETAKE, or just follow the link in the description. Now, let's get back to Black Christmas. It's Christmas time, and the Sisters of Pi Kappa Sigma wrap up their party by sending the boys home. Except for one they don't know is in the house, because while they were busy boozing, he climbed up the trellis and helped himself into the attic. Soon, he calls the girls, and Jess Bradford answers the phone. It's him again, the creepy guy who keeps calling, the one they've nicknamed the Moaner. He breathes heavily, screeches, laughs, garbles his tongue, and says obscene things. Sometimes the sounds are so unintelligible, it's hard to believe they come from one man.
Let me lick it.
The girls are disturbed until the sharp-tongued Barb comes to the rescue, grabbing the phone and telling him to stick his tongue in a wall socket. He ends the call with an eerily calm, "I'm going to kill you," before hanging up. Claire is worried. Maybe she shouldn't provoke him like that. But Barb is undeterred, only making fun of Claire's easily offended sensibilities. So Claire excuses herself upstairs to pack for the holidays, but never comes back down. Instead, the Moaner strangles her and leaves her body on a rocking chair in the attic, all while the others are distracted by the arrival of Mrs. Mack, their vulgar, dry-humored, and alcoholic housemother. As Claire rocks in her chair, night turns to day, and her father wonders why she's late. He was supposed to pick her up half an hour ago, but she never showed. Mrs. Mack hasn't seen her, and she isn't with the others. Meanwhile, Jess has her hands full with her own problems. She's pregnant and already decided to have an abortion, something her boyfriend Peter takes poorly. In fact, he's so distracted, he bombs at his important piano recital. Not to mention, the calls haven't stopped.
What your mother and I must know is, where did you put the baby, Pippi?
You've got the wrong number.
Where did you put Agnes, Billy?
While Jess learns the Moaner might be named Billy, Phil and Barb accompany Claire's father to the police station where they report her missing. That night, Barb drunkenly accuses everyone of thinking this her fault. After all, she's the one who made fun of Claire and sent her up to pack. This time, it's her they send up, to sleep off the booze. The others head out to join the search party, for Claire and Janice, a high school girl who's also gone missing. Though Mrs. Mack stays behind and lasts only a few minutes before she ends up hanging dead from a hook in the same attic as Claire. Her screams die, but new ones take their place as the search party finds Janice's body in the woods, and Jess returns home to another one of those calls. This time, the killer puts on a strange voice, chastising Billy for what he did. After hanging up, she's startled by someone in the house, Peter, there to ask her hand in marriage and beg her to reconsider the pregnancy. He even offers to quit the conservatory to be available as a father and a husband. But she doesn't want him to give up his dreams, nor does she want to give up her own. Peter is upset and stops just short of threatening her before leaving.
You're talking about killing our baby as though you were having a wart removed. You're going to be very sorry.
He storms past the lieutenant, there to investigate Claire's disappearance, inadvertently putting himself at the top of their suspect list. The lieutenant and his officer ask some questions, and tap their phones in case Billy calls again. Later in the night, when Jess is the only one up, she's visited by carolers, and their rendition of "O Come All Ye Faithful" covers up the screams from upstairs. Billy stabs Barb to death with a sharp unicorn figure he found in her room. After that, Billy calls again with a more frantic collection of voices. One phrase in particular gets Jess's attention. "Just like having a wart removed." The same thing Peter said to her. They try to trace the call, but this is 1974 when tracing a call meant painstakingly following a live circuit at a switch station. A circuit which disappears when Billy hangs up. The operator moves fast but can't get his location in time. Jess will need to keep him on the phone longer. The next call is a tearful one from Peter, begging her not to kill the baby. The lieutenant listens in, forcing Jess to finally admit her situation. And the lieutenant wonders, could Peter be a suspect? Well, she only told him about the pregnancy today, and he was there when the first call came. It can't be Peter. Not long after that, Phil heads upstairs and finds Barb's body, just before getting killed herself, leaving Jess as the only living soul in the house other than their killer. And the next time he calls, they successfully trace his location, but how do they tell Jess there's a killer in the house without causing her to do anything rash? The lieutenant is away from the station looking for Peter, so it's up to Officer Nash to make the call. He rings Jess, asks her to hang up, step outside, and don't ask any questions. But of course she does, and she's insistent. So he finally admits. The calls are coming from inside the house. Jess calls for Phil and Barb to come with her, but of course they don't answer. She grabs a fire poker, then heads upstairs to find both their corpses and their killer. She survives the encounter and runs to the basement. She hides while someone breaks in. Peter, is he there to help, or is he the killer? Jess's panicked mind assumes the latter. The police find her cradling his body, killed in supposed self-defense. With the killer assumed dead, the police put Jess to rest in her bed and then leave her alone. Soon, the killer descends from his hiding place in the attic to make another call, and throughout the sorority house turned mausoleum, its rings can be heard. Wow, that's one of the most downer endings I've seen for a slasher. The final girl mistakes her boyfriend for the killer, kills him in self-defense, then gets left alone by the cops with the actual killer still in the house. But it isn't just a downer, it's also kind of absurd. It's believable Jess would suspect Peter, even if the timing doesn't quite work, because her mind is in a panicked state. It's less believable that the cops would find him dead and conduct no further investigation. Jess is in shock and unresponsive, so they don't get her side of the story before saying, well, it looks like she killed him, so Peter was definitely the killer. Why would he start killing? Does the timing of any of this make sense? Who cares? Let's go home. The fact that the actual killer is still in the house, and so are Claire and Mrs. Mack's bodies, tells you everything you need to know about how much investigation they did before calling it a night. And even if they were correct that Peter was the killer, wouldn't you still take Jess out of the house, maybe to the hospital for observation overnight? I've never faced off with a serial killer. Well, except for that one time. Watch my Halloween video to get that reference. But if I was in shock and came to in the middle of the night after killing someone very close to me, I feel like I wouldn't be too jazzed about finding myself completely alone in a house where all my friends died. To be fair, it looks like they leave one cop standing outside her front door. I'm sure that'll work out great. I didn't mention it in the recap, but they had a cop observing the place, and he got killed off screen. Clearly, I'm not a big fan of the ending, but what about the rest of the movie? It starts off pretty strong. There's sort of a formula to most successful slashers, which this movie helped to define. Give us time to bond with a cast of characters and preview some danger lurking in the shadows. Do it right, and we'll feel tension as the danger approaches. This movie does a decent job of it. The characters all feel like real people, so there's a default empathy watching them in danger. Beyond that, Margot Kidder is great in the role of Barb. She's a lot of fun, and it's satisfying to watch her tell off their stalker.
Oh, why don't you go find a wall socket and stick your tongue in it? That'll give you a charge.
I'll stick my tongue up your pretty.
Mrs. Mack, played by Marion Waldman, also brings some levity to the movie. It's entertaining to watch her go from encouraging the usual sorority revelries to awkwardly covering them up when interacting with Claire's more conservative father. Unfortunately, other than these two characters, the rest don't have much personality, including the main character of Jess. That's understandable considering what she's going through. She would be a little subdued, but that's where it's helpful to have other, more lively characters. The problem is that these characters get written out early on. Barb goes to sleep at the 35-minute mark, and we don't hear from her again until she dies. There is also a red herring right before that where she wakes up from an asthma attack, but then goes right back to sleep.
Easy, relax. You'll be okay.
At around 40 minutes, right after Barb went to bed, Mrs. Mack gets killed. With both these characters gone, the movie starts to feel a little lifeless. It's especially a shame with Barb, because her character had some interesting developments. She storms upstairs after accusing everyone of insinuating it's her fault Claire is missing. You get the feeling no one actually said anything, but she's just projecting her guilt. I felt bad for her and wanted to see more of her character working through that. But instead, the filmmakers thought it better to have her spend the rest of the movie asleep. Also, given her fun but tough personality, I was hoping to see how she'd react and handle herself once they found out their stalker wasn't just a creep, but an actual killer, and we never got to see that. The killer is the other part of this formula. Is he going to just be a generic knife-wielding maniac or something more? Halloween created a presence that felt transcendent, thanks to Myers' mysterious backstory and Loomis's monologue about evil. Billy doesn't quite reach the same legendary status, but he is effectively creepy. His backstory is entirely unexplored, so there's that sense of unknown you love to see in horror. And that unknown is preserved because we're often with him only using POV shots, so you don't actually see what he looks like. Other than that, it's just shadows and glimpses. You do hear his voice, but only kind of, because he's often making strange noises and putting on different voices. So it's hard to say what he actually sounds like naturally. So even when he speaks, the unknown is still preserved, while adding more creepiness. Because the inhuman way he speaks makes it sound almost like he's possessed. Some of the things he says, you could imagine coming out of Reagan's mouth in The Exorcist. There are also some really disturbing moments where we spend time alone with Billy between kills, and his behavior is so erratic. You can't tell if he's celebrating the murders or feeling anxious over what he's done. The part I found most disturbing is when he puts a baby doll in Claire's arms. He rocks her back and forth while sobbing and trying to sing the nursery rhyme, Bye Baby Bunting. It's also super creepy the way Billy is always a looming presence, and he's inside the house for most of the movie, or the fact that Claire and Mrs. Mack's bodies are right upstairs the whole time and none of the characters know it. If you watch these scenes where Claire's father is in the house, wondering where his daughter is, it makes you sick to your stomach when you remember her body is just a couple of floors above him. Going back to the characters though, aside from Barb, there's another character who I really wanted to see more from, Claire's father. Considering what he's going through, he does a great job keeping it together and holding on to hope. But you can feel his exhaustion and fear underneath. So there's tension waiting for him to learn the inevitable truth we've known the whole time, that his daughter is dead. I was waiting for that bomb to go off the entire movie. Not that I want to see a grieving father, but I wanted the emotional release. Instead, Black Christmas takes the easy way out. We don't see much of a reaction at all before he goes into shock and faints. I kinda hate when movies use that trick. I'm not saying it doesn't happen in real life, but we want to see actors dig deep to portray difficult emotions. So it's disappointing when the opportunity arrives and instead the direction is, I need you to collapse and pretend you're asleep. It's doubly frustrating because the same thing happens to Jess. If I had to pick my number one point of feedback for this movie, it'd be keep your characters awake. Barb, Jess, and Claire's dad. Though I will say, when Jess was given something to do, the actress Olivia Hussey does a great job. The panic when she realizes the killer is in the house and her futile unanswered screams to Phil and Barb are intense and you really feel it. So at the end of the day, the movie's a mixed bag. I can see why it had mixed reviews upon release, but can also see why it's been held in higher regard as time's gone on. It's effective in some of the most important ways. It's creepy and tense. Plus, it helped to solidify the slasher genre, which in some ways began 14 years earlier with Hitchcock's Psycho. This movie crystallized the structure, and 4 years later, Halloween elevated it with an iconic villain and a face-off not with one evil madman, but perhaps evil itself. So, what's next? Well, in a way, that movie was a little tame, just a crazy guy killing people. I think it's time for something which takes more advantage of Christmas time, when the impossible becomes possible, when miracles can occur, and so can curses. The next movie is from Michael Dougherty. In 2007, he made a love letter to Halloween with Trick or Treat, a movie I've always enjoyed. Then in 2015, he found a way to bring his love of horror to Christmas, when he learned about Krampus. And that's actually who I have on my sweater here. The origins of Krampus aren't entirely clear. Pagan Germanic folklore included some demonic horned figures. When Christmas came along, some of that might have been absorbed into the new tradition, and the counterpart to Santa was born, Krampus. Every December, a large horned creature with cloven hooves travels from house to house, punishing naughty boys and girls. In some tellings, he takes away their gifts and hits them with bundles of twigs. And in other tellings, he eats them or drags them to hell. The Catholic Church tried to ban him, but you can't keep a good Krampus down. It's Christmas time, and the Angle house is filled with cheer, except one small blemish, Max's fresh black eye. The school bully tried to ruin Christmas by telling the younger kids that Santa isn't real, and Max wouldn't stand for it. That's how much he loves the holiday. But looming on the horizon is an even bigger threat. The cousins will be here any minute. The Angles have never gotten along with Sarah's side of the extended family, and upon their arrival, it's easy to see why. They are boisterous, rude, ungrateful, and all the kids are brats. Though the worst is probably Aunt Dorothy.
So what kind of godforsaken concoction are you whipping up now? You know how this fancy food clogs my pipes.
Things reach a fever pitch when the cousins steal Max's letter to Santa and mockingly read it aloud. I know I haven't been great this year, and I'm sorry for that, but I was really hoping you could help out me and my family this Christmas. We need you. Things get awkward when they reach his wish list, because it's genuinely heartfelt and sad. I wish me and Beth could hang out like we used to. You might have noticed that I don't have tons of friends. I wish my mom and dad could fall in love again. I know they get upset a lot with dad away from home so much. I think they really just miss each other. And Max didn't just think of his side of the family. They read on. Also, I wish things weren't so hard for Uncle Howard and Aunt Linda, so maybe you can lend them a hand the rest of the year too. Max wrestles back the letter, and before storming off, announces, I just wanted Christmas to be like it used to be, but forget it. I hate Christmas. I hate all of you. Upstairs, Max asks his dad why they have to put up with their crap every year, and for a moment it stumps him. Then he wonders if maybe that's what Christmas is about, working a little harder to find what you have in common, putting everything aside and thinking of other people for a change, even the ones you can't stand. It's a nice thought, but not quite enough to lift his spirits. Max tears up the letter and tosses it out his window. The wind carries off the scraps, and a powerful storm engulfs their town. The family wakes up to no power, no heat, and a snowman in their yard. Max's older sister Beth tries contacting her boyfriend, but doesn't get an answer. So she ventures into the storm to check on him. After all, he only lives a few blocks away. But outside, Beth finds only a frozen hellscape, guarded by a large horned figure. It leaps from house to house and chases the girl, who seeks refuge under a DHL van, whose driver has already perished. The thing reveals its cloven hooves when it approaches the van and leaves a jack-in-the-box. Whatever leaps out of it attacks Beth. Once it gets dark out, the family starts to worry. She should be back by now. Her father Tom decides he'll go look for her, with help from Sarah's brother-in-law Howard, who is good for something after all. His Hummer, which can brave any storm. They find an abandoned snowplow, whose shattered windshield tells a story about a driver killed by something. So Howard reveals the rest of his arsenal, a rifle for him and revolver for Tom. They enter the boyfriend's house and find it abandoned, along with a gingerbread doll pinned to the fridge with a knife, and hoof prints near a destroyed fireplace, like something burst out of it. Outside, they hear Beth shouting for help. They run after her until something bites Howard and pulls him under the snow. Tom manages to free him by firing off a few shots. They return to the Hummer, but find it torn to pieces, so they hobble their way back home without Beth, and treat the severe bite wounds on Howard's leg. After boarding up the windows and hunkering down, Howard thanks Tom for saving his life, and apologizes for his rudeness over the years.
I just want to say I'm sorry for thinking you're such a spineless dick all these years.
That night, the family sleeps as the flames in their fireplace die out, opening their chimney to visitors. A chain lowers with a gingerbread man attached. Cousin Howie takes the bait. After one delicious bite, the cookie comes to life and wraps the chains around the boy. He's pulled up the chimney until Sarah grabs onto him and the others join in a game of tug-of-war, which they lose. Tom's German-speaking mother, Omi, reignites the flames and finally tells them what's going on. She tells them about Krampus. When she was a child, she believed in Christmas and Santa, despite the dire straits of her family and their village. Starving people fought over bread and forgot about miracles. They forgot about Christmas and the sacrifice of giving. She tried at least to help her family believe again, but it was no use. They too gave up, and eventually she did the same, no longer wishing for a miracle, but instead wishing for them to just go away. That night, in the darkness of a howling blizzard, she got her wish. That year, St. Nicholas did not come to their home, but instead a darker, more ancient spirit, the shadow of St. Nicholas, Krampus. He came not to reward, but to punish, not to give, but to take. He and his helpers dragged her family to the underworld and left her behind along with a dark ornament, as a reminder of what happens when hope is lost and the Christmas spirit dies. Now, it's happening all over again, just in time for Christmas Eve. Tom gathers the family and hatches a plan. He'll book it for that abandoned snowplow. Everyone else will pile into the car and follow while he clears a path to the mall, which doubles as an emergency shelter. It's a solid plan, but they're up against an ancient evil. First, they're attacked by Krampus's helpers. Cousin Jordan gets swallowed by a jack-in-the-box. Howard fends off gingerbread men who've armed themselves with a nail gun. Before long, a living angel doll, teddy bear, and robot toy join the fight. But the parents fight back, and knives, axes, and guns prove effective against what should be inanimate objects. But soon, reinforcements arrive in the form of demonic elves. They take Aunt Dorothy, baby Chrissy, and Howard, then make way for their master. Krampus himself makes his way down the chimney. They make a break for it, while Grandma Omi stays behind to buy them time and face the ancient spirit once again. The others make their way through the storm, and they're quickly tailed by a creature beneath the snow, perhaps the same one which bit Howard earlier. Tom fires on it, but realizes the only hope is for him to stay behind and slow it down. He bids his family farewell, and fires off a few more shots before he's swallowed. It gets his sister-in-law next, and finally, his wife. Leaving only Max and his cousin Stevie, he feebly attempts to start the snowplow before the elves are on top of them. They carry off Stevie, while Max manages to fend them off. He chases after them until Krampus steps in his path and hands him something wrapped in that letter he threw out. A dark ornament, just like the one he left Max's grandmother so many years earlier. But Max refuses to accept this end. He finds Krampus and his elves. He tosses back the ornament and demands his family back. A pit appears between them, leading to fiery depths, but the boy is undeterred. "Take me instead," Max offers. Krampus collects his tear, then laughs with his elves. They toss Stevie into the pit, and Max follows shortly after. The next thing he knows, Max wakes up in his bed on Christmas Day to find both families downstairs putting aside their differences and sharing in some good old-fashioned Christmas cheer. Soon it's time to open up the presents, and under the tree, Max finds a peculiar gift, a dark ornament, courtesy of Krampus. It cuts through the cheerful atmosphere like a knife. They remember. They all remember. And they best not forget, because from his workshop, through his snow globe, Krampus is watching, lest they ever again let their Christmas spirits die. Whoa, things were pretty dark there until the ending. This definitely isn't a children's movie, but when you have a Christmas movie filled with child actors, you don't expect it to be a slaughter. Yet that's exactly how this movie plays out. It often reminded me of The Mist. It has the same sense of isolation and fear of the outside world, plus the lingering question of how widespread is this? Is it just us, or is the world ending? But in the end, Krampus undoes it all and the family gets a second chance. A happy ending. Or is it? Some have a darker interpretation. The whole Christmas Day scene has a dreamlike quality to it, like maybe it isn't real, and the camera zooms out from the family to reveal the snow globe, almost like it's implying they're inside it. The idea being, Krampus has them trapped in a false reality in a snow globe where they'll be forced to relive Christmas Day for eternity, which would make this movie less It's a Wonderful Life and more Black Mirror. On the DVD commentary, the writers and director liked how people disagreed on the proper interpretation and thought it worked as a sort of litmus test. Do you prefer the pessimistic or optimistic ending? But if you're like me and you enjoy a puzzle, there are some clues which point to the happier ending. Grandma Omi had a similar experience with Krampus years earlier and did not end up trapped in a snow globe. The only difference with Max is that he proved himself willing to sacrifice. So it'd be weird if that resulted in a harsher punishment, when Krampus's whole modus operandi is punishment for people who lose their Christmas spirit. Finally, the tie-in comic, which expands the mythology with a trick-or-treat style anthology, supports the happier ending. It tells stories of a few different characters who encounter Krampus on Christmas Eve. Each of them experiences something awful while somehow redeeming themselves. On Christmas Day, they wake up with their Christmas spirits renewed and a second chance at life. No mention of any snow globes. So, what did I actually think of the movie? Clearly, it kept me pretty engaged because I cared enough to contemplate the ending and do some digging on it. The thing that surprised me most about this movie is how earnest it was. Given some of the cast members, especially David Koechner, I expected it to be pretty over the top and irreverent. But the first act, meeting the Angles and their extended family, felt pretty grounded. When they mentioned the cousins were coming, I thought they'd be cartoonishly awful. And sometimes Krampus might dip its toes in that water, but generally, you could see why the families don't get along, but none of them are cartoon villains. Sometimes their carelessness is played for laughs, like when they forget they have a baby.
Sorry, wasn't there another child?
Chrissy! Darn it! Jordan, I told you to bring her inside.
Not my kid.
But when you see the sisters bond, you can feel the tragedy of family members that were once close but have since drifted apart. And when Max's letter gets read aloud, your heart breaks again because he just wants everyone to get along. As a child, it's hard for him to understand why they don't. I have to say, all around, this movie has a great cast, including Adam Scott and Toni Collette. They generally make their characters feel like real people, with maybe the exception of the cousins. Although they don't always fall into cartoonish awfulness, they don't necessarily rise to the level of fully realized three-dimensional characters either. But focusing on the adults, there's a warmth that comes through watching the parents put aside their differences and work together for a greater cause, protecting their children. The movie also does a great job of building dread. When Beth heads out for the first time, the oppressive winter storm and frozen homes are already terrifying. You feel such a sense of isolation. Then when Krampus shows up, you don't get a close look at him yet, but there's a nightmare quality to the way he can be so far away, yet have no trouble keeping up when you run for your life. Plus, the way he has the higher ground makes it feel like Beth is a fish in a barrel. It's genuinely horrifying, and doubly so because these characters aren't just friends. They are brothers, sisters, mothers, and fathers. You know that each victim matters more than anything to the rest of the characters at the house. The movie does drag a bit in the second half because it starts to feel bleak, like these characters don't stand a chance, and they never really have an opportunity to be proactive. I compared this movie to The Mist earlier, but if you think back on that movie, it was really engaging because there was a lot of debate between the characters over how to handle the situation. There was tension as they turned on each other, and although hope was faint, there was some, and it kept you watching, hoping they'll survive. With Krampus, the characters don't get a chance to be proactive, so you don't get much of a chance to have hope. For example, Tom hatches a plan, but it falls apart and they all get killed almost immediately. For the most part, they're just waiting at the house like fish in a barrel. Good for building dread in one scene, but if you spend too much of the movie there, like I said, it can become bleak. On the comedy side, there are definitely some highlights. The gingerbread men versus Howard, or how easily the one kid falls for the bait in the fireplace. And during the battle with Krampus's living toys, I started to get Evil Dead 2 vibes, though I wish they went further and more over the top with it. That might sound counter to the more grounded tone I talked about earlier, but I think that's part of the difficulty with this movie. It's battling between going for comedy and being a legitimate horror thriller. And I think if it doubled down on one or the other, it would have been more successful. If it was aiming for over the top, it could have taken a page out of the comics. One of the stories actually features a mall Santa who happens to be a war vet. So when killer toys and elves show up, he's ready for them, and he leads a small army of children in the battle. It got my imagination running for another version of this movie. You could picture Dawn of the Dead, but instead of zombies, they're mowing down these creepy elves. But I imagine budget constraints didn't allow them to go quite as far as they'd have liked. I will say overall, I appreciated the creature designs. Krampus is a terrifying and imposing figure. This shadow of Santa, with his evil elves and reindeer, holding children over a pit to hell, is a creative and well-executed image that's hard to get out of your head. Overall, even though it dragged a little for me in the second half, I thought this movie was worth a watch, and I'd love to see a sequel to it one day, but only after Doherty finally gets around to Trick or Treat 2. Next up, let's go to the 80s for something that'll squash even the faintest hint of Christmas cheer. This is a movie where Gene Siskel publicly shamed the people who made it. He read their names on air and proclaimed, "Your profits truly are blood money." He also called it one of the two most contemptible movies he's ever seen, the other being I Spit on Your Grave. And he wasn't alone. It wasn't unusual when the movie came out to see protests in front of the theater. And this is a Christmas movie? I mean, we have to watch it, right? The movie we're talking about is 1984's Silent Night, Deadly Night. On Christmas Eve 1971, 5-year-old Billy Chapman is dragged by his parents to a nursing home for a visit with Grandpa. The catatonic senior doesn't say a word until Billy's parents leave the room. Then he grabs the boy and tells him the truth about Santa Claus. Sure, good boys and girls are rewarded, but if you've been naughty at all, if you've slipped up even once in the last year, Santa will punish you. On the drive home, Billy isn't so sure he wants a visit from Santa after all, and his feelings on old Saint Nick are fully soured when a carjacker dressed as Santa kills his parents in front of him. After that, he's raised in an orphanage with his younger brother, where his hatred and fear of Santa Claus is not tolerated by the Mother Superior. Sister Margaret recognizes his cries for help, but it's not up to her. The Mother Superior believes in discipline. When Billy has nightmares of the night that left him an orphan, and he wakes up screaming, she believes in tying him to the bed until he screams himself back to sleep. 10 years later, Billy has grown into a functional 18-year-old, a productive member of society, so long as you don't mention Christmas around him. You can understand it's something of a touchy subject for him. Unfortunately for Billy, Christmas is right around the corner, and he happens to work at a toy store. The holiday fast approaches, and Billy can barely hold it together. His productivity and attitude crumble under the icy tendrils of Father Christmas, and on December 24th, something terrible happens. The man hired to play Santa for the toy store calls out after an ice skating-related injury. The store owner is desperate. He needs a man he can put in a Santa outfit. Wait a minute, he realizes. How about the new kid? How about Billy? The traumatized boy hides behind a white beard, nearly as catatonic as his grandpa 13 years earlier. When a little girl sits on his lap and acts out, Billy echoes his grandfather and the Mother Superior. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" he asks. "You're being naughty, right on Santa's lap. I don't bring toys to naughty children. I punish them severely." Billy makes it through the day, and once the store closes, the owner announces,
7 o'clock! It's over! Time to get shit-faced!
Their little Christmas party seems to go well. Billy even has a drink. But they have no idea. The moment they put him in that costume, they started a ticking time bomb. And when Billy spots Andy forcing himself on Pamela, he remembers Santa doing the same thing to his own mother. And the bomb goes off. Billy is gone, and in his place, Santa Claus, who punishes the naughty. Andy dies with stringed lights around his throat. Pamela would have been spared if she didn't call him crazy and hit him for killing Andy. He gets her with a box cutter, just like the one that killed his mother. That only leaves the store owner and Mrs. Randall. Billy makes short work of them, with a hammer and arrow, respectively. In a nearby house, Billy kills 2 canoodling teens. The girl is impaled on deer antlers, and the boy is thrown out a window. All the commotion catches the attention of little Cindy. And has she been a good girl? Yes, she insists. Santa spares her punishment, and instead hands her a gift, the now bloodied box cutter. In the woods, a couple of bullies steal another kid's sled. One of them takes it for a ride, and reaches the bottom of the hill minus a head, the handiwork of Billy's axe. Finally, the sun rises on Christmas Day, and Sister Margaret works with the police to find Billy. She realizes what he's up to. He must be carving his way back home to the orphanage for a confrontation with the Mother Superior. She heads toward the orphanage with Captain Richards. In the meantime, Officer Barnes arrives to patrol the area, and he spots Santa marching toward the children. He shouts for the man to stop, and when he doesn't comply, shoots him dead. But it isn't Billy he's killed. It's Father O'Brien, the deaf pastor who dressed up for the children. Barnes continues his patrol until Billy kills him and finally gets to the Mother Superior. He raises his axe until Captain Richards shoots him in the back. "You're safe now," Billy tells the children. Santa Claus is gone. Billy dies with his younger brother standing over him. The 14-year-old Ricky looks from his dead brother to the Mother Superior and with sharp, angry eyes says one word.
Naughty.
So why was this movie so controversial? It wasn't the first time Santa was a serial killer. Christmas Evil beat it by 4 years. But somehow the advertising campaign for Silent Night, Deadly Night struck a chord. People hated how much it leaned into making Santa a figure to be feared. The poster shows him entering a chimney with an axe. So maybe people thought the movie would portray the actual Santa as evil, not realizing it was just an unhinged guy in a suit. As for the movie itself, it does get pretty gory, though the cheesy practical effects make them more ridiculous and fun than genuinely off-putting. And at its best, that's what this movie is, ridiculous fun. Though it's unclear how intentional that is, because the movie starts off with a pretty serious tone. It can be really uncomfortable for children to be in a place like a nursing home. It can sometimes be scary. And this movie exploits that fear when Billy's grandpa inexplicably comes to life to warn him about Santa Claus. I love how there's no explanation for that. I mean, clearly the grandpa is faking it because the moment Billy's parents walk back into the room, he immediately goes back to staring blankly without speaking. Why is he doing that? What does he have to gain? Is he just lazy and he wants people to take care of him, so he pretends to essentially be in a coma? Like Buster in Arrested Development. Whatever the case, Billy is clearly traumatized, and that's only the beginning of it. Then you watch his parents get brutally, graphically murdered in front of him. And after that, there's about 15 minutes of him getting abused at an orphanage. It's all just pretty awful to watch. And with the exception of his grandpa faking a coma, only breaking it to freak out a little kid, it's all played totally straight. I mean, even that moment I don't think was meant to be over the top or funny. Once we skip ahead to 1984, it feels like the filmmakers realized this premise is ridiculous. And then there's kind of a tonal whiplash because it goes from deadly serious to over-the-top absurdity, the kind you expect from this premise. For example, it's hard not to laugh when the store owner asks Billy if he can dress up as Santa. You know that's not going to go well. Then it cuts to the owner and manager smiling directly at the camera like, oh yeah, that's perfect. Cut to Billy white-knuckling it from behind his white beard, all wide-eyed like, yeah, this is fine. Or every time he kills someone, the way he yells, naughty, or punish.
Naughty! Punishment is necessary, Pamela. It is good.
There you are, you bad kitty.
Punish! 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 Naughty!
Again, it's hard to tell if these moments are intentionally funny because at least the first act of this movie felt like it wanted to be taken seriously. So they're either a symptom of so bad it's good, or they're intentionally over the top. But if it was intentional, you wish they'd do more of it because in between these moments, the movie falls flat. It's just your average slasher setups. Two teens are getting it on, and there's a sound at the door. Or a couple of bullies are picking on some kids, but wait, what's that sound? There's someone else around. These scenes are boring. So are scenes like this one where Officer Barnes is patrolling for Billy. We just met Barnes. We don't care about him, so there's no tension, just twiddling our thumbs waiting to see how he dies and which tagline Billy will shout.
Punish!
This movie is desperate for a main character, or really any characters at all. Billy is the closest thing it has to a protagonist, but once he snaps, he's basically gone. And then there are no continuous characters throughout the movie because he kills everyone. There's no one we're rooting for. It's just boring setup, ridiculous, somewhat entertaining kill, then back to boring setup, back to fun kill. The movie almost has a Dr. Loomis character in Sister Margaret. She calls the store and finds out that Billy is working as their Santa, which is obviously very worrying news. So you could imagine a scenario where she's following Billy's murder trail, attempting to stop him. But even in the scene where she calls the store, she doesn't have any lines. She doesn't do anything until the last 15 minutes of the movie, so they can set up the final confrontation at the orphanage. You can imagine a scenario where she has more to do, and if the movie played it straight, it could have worked as a sort of deadpan parody of slasher movies. Just picture Dr. Loomis finding out they put Michael in a Santa outfit. You did what? Do you understand what kind of evil you've unleashed? This will not be a Merry Christmas after all. So overall, I have the same problem with this movie as I do a lot of these movies people call so bad they're good. Oftentimes, bad means boring, as in nothing is really happening, and there's too much of that in this movie. Plus, there's the opening 25 minutes where stuff is happening, but it's not fun to watch. It's just awful. And not in a dark drama kind of way, where there's emotional catharsis in watching. It's really just there because the movie needs an excuse for Billy to be traumatized into murder via Santa. But it could have been a lot more efficient. We didn't need to spend so much time there. And I think if the filmmakers knew from the start they were making a dark comedy, they would have known to spend less time on the backstory. Because some dark things can be funny, while others maybe cross a line. For example, you know there's a killer Santa on the loose. You see one at the orphanage and shout for him to stop, but he doesn't comply. You shoot him, then you find out you've just killed a pastor. Why didn't he reply? Well, he was deaf. It's a comedy of errors, where things don't just go wrong, they go as wrong as they could possibly go. You didn't just get the wrong guy, you killed Father O'Brien, the deaf pastor, and no one really seems to care. Sure, the Mother Superior is annoyed and Officer Barnes is sorry, but almost begrudgingly so. Like, look, I said I was sorry. It's the kind of horrible thing you might laugh at in Fargo or The Big Lebowski. But on the other hand, child abuse? A kid watching a murderer rip his mother's shirt open before slashing her throat with a box cutter? That stuff isn't funny and doesn't work in this movie. And you can see why it would have contributed to the controversy back in 1984. But there was some fun to be had, and it seems the controversy actually gave the movie more attention. Believe it or not, it has 4 sequels and a remake, plus there was a reboot in the works a couple of years ago, but unclear if that's still happening. Oh! And speaking of sequels, another example of this movie having a character like Sister Margaret, but doing nothing with them, is Billy's brother. He's an infant in the first scene, but at the orphanage, we hardly see them interact at all. Then at the end of the movie, they add this line so you'll remember they're brothers.
Such a good boy. Not at all like his older brother, William.
The understatement of the year. Anyway, I kept wondering, what's the deal with his brother? Why is he even in this movie? And then at the end, it's obvious. He was there for sequel setup. I love how they indicate he's turned evil just by saying that one word, naughty. By the way, the sequel does focus on Ricky becoming a serial killer, but apparently the producers originally just wanted to recut the original movie and pass it off as a re-release or somehow a sequel. But the filmmakers convinced them to shoot new material, and they did make a sequel, though it heavily relied on flashbacks. The first half of the movie is Ricky in an institution recounting what happened in the first movie. So you end up rewatching about 30 minutes of footage from the first movie in the sequel. Anyway, Silent Night, Deadly Night is the kind of movie that's best enjoyed with a group, where during the boring scenes you can grab a snack, talk to each other, make fun of the movie, and then when something crazy happens, you can all laugh at it. Next up, we have a movie which Siskel's counterpart Roger Ebert called an R-rated Santa Claus origin story crossed with The Thing. That sounds amazing. This is Rare Exports, A Christmas Tale, a 2014 Finnish fantasy action comedy horror. Quick disclaimer, this movie is in the Finnish language, which means it has a lot of characters' names that I will struggle to pronounce. So maybe make a Christmas game out of it. Anytime I botch a pronunciation, take a shot of eggnog. Or maybe just take a bunch of shots right now so you won't notice when I mess up. Legend has it that Irfel, a mountain on the border between Finland and Russia, is home to the one and only Santa Claus. But to some, it's more than legend, including Riley, who leads a team of researchers in blasting and digging deep into the mountain. Local boy Pietari spies on their excavation and then does some research on the true Santa Claus, the one who brutally punishes little boys and girls. Over the next few weeks, he watches the excavation site cautiously, but there's little else he can do. After all, who would believe his warnings that Santa Claus is coming to town? But soon, the danger makes itself known. His father Rauno and the other fathers in town are hunters, and reindeer meat is their game. But on December 23rd, nearly all the reindeer turn up dead. $85,000 worth of meat gone, plus 22% VAT. They suspect wolves, agitated by the incessant blasting on the mountain. They approach the research team to complain, but it seems after carving a hole in Irfel, they abandoned the place. On the morning of Christmas Eve, Rauno catches something in his wolf trap, a skinny old man with a gray beard. He quickly recruits a colleague, dressed for a gig as Santa, to dispose of the body, but as they attempt to saw into the corpse, it proves alive. The man refuses to speak, but he shows signs of life when gingerbread cookies or children are near. The adults think him just a strange old man, but Pietari knows the truth. They've captured Santa Claus, and clearly he's up to something, because there's news around town of stolen radiators, hair dryers, and potato sacks. As they poke and prod the old man, one hunter nearly losing an ear in the process, they come to believe the boy. This man is Santa, and to those researchers who were digging, he'd be worth a pretty penny. He might even be worth millions. But all Rauno wants is the $85,000 plus 22% VAT they were robbed of. They manage to get a hold of the research team and agree to meet at an airbase to broker a deal. But when Riley gets close to this supposed Santa Claus, he realizes the truth. This isn't Santa. It's only one of his elves. Riley gravely tells the men to be quiet and smile, because he knows that if their good cheer falters for even a moment, they'll become a lightning rod for the other elves. If they don't believe his warnings, the axe which lands in the back of his skull proves them. Dozens of armed elves, all resembling naked old men with gray beards, descend on the hunters. They run into the hangar for safety, where they find the real Santa, encased in ice. It's exactly what Pietari read about. The real Santa used to tear little kids to pieces, and the Sami people got angry. They lured him onto ice, which broke under him, freezing him in the lake. Come summer, they dug out the ice block and buried it under a sky-high pile of rocks, which became Irfel. The elves, freed by the excavation, are using the town's radiators to defrost their master, and once he's out, the town's children, trapped in potato sacks, await his wrath. The men quickly toss away the radiators to stop what's coming, but Pietari knows it won't do any good. It's only a matter of time before the army of elves get inside. But he has an idea. They throw the sacks of kids into a helicopter cargo net and fly off. The scent of all those children draws the elves away, and they bring them to a reindeer pen, which leaves the men free to blow up the hangar and Santa Claus along with it. With their master dead, the elves are out of the job, until Rauno and the others offer them a new one. They train the elves to treat children well and give out gifts. They dress them in Santa outfits and toss them into shipping containers to be sold for millions around the world. Truly rare exports. This is a ridiculous movie, But the great thing is that it takes itself completely seriously. The most absurd thing could be happening, like a bunch of axe-wielding old men running through the snow with their genitalia flapping in the wind, while hunters fire on them and run for their lives. And no one winks at the camera or cracks jokes. In fact, hardly anyone cracks a smile at all in this movie. You can easily imagine if this were remade in America, once they got into the hangar and out of harm's way, one of the characters would say something like, "Is no one going to acknowledge that a bunch of naked guys who look like Santa are trying to kill us right now?" Or when they see the giant horns sticking out of the Santa ice block, they'd say, "Oh, so Santa has giant horns now, and I thought this day couldn't get any weirder." There is definitely humor in this movie, but it's a deadpan humor that comes from the characters taking their situation seriously. For example, there's a moment where Pietari is talking to his dad outside, and while they're calmly talking, you hear other characters inside fighting with the elf they think is Santa. There's another moment where the boy spots them trying to dispose of the corpse. The kid runs, so his dad goes after him and immediately finds him flagging down the sheriff. And he's just looking at his son like, "What are you doing?" The last thing you want is for him to involve the cops, and he doesn't find him calling the cops. He literally finds him running up to the sheriff like, hey, over here." It ends up not being exactly what he thinks, but in the moment, how quickly it happens was hilarious. Or there's this moment where one of the characters uses gingerbread cookies as a distraction so he can sneak into the helicopter, just like those scenes in cartoons where people distract guard dogs with red meat. What's great about this approach is that it lets the movie work on two layers. There's the humor layer, where you can laugh at the straight-faced ridiculousness of it, but also, because it takes itself seriously, you can too. It doesn't use comedy as a crutch, because it still tries to tell a compelling story. It doesn't delve too deep into character or backstories, but it communicates a lot with a little. The boy's father makes them gingerbread cookies, and the kid says that they're good, just like Mom used to make. You can see the struggle for this man to raise his son and literally put food on the table. And then his son asks, "Dad, what if I didn't exist?" You see, he and his friend cut a hole in the fence so they could sneak out and spy on the excavation. So he thinks it's his fault that wolves got in and killed the reindeer. The guilt is eating away at him so badly, he's wondering if maybe it'd be better if he didn't exist. It's not an obvious line to write, but it's one that captures the way a child might think. And it conveys his guilt in a really effective way, more powerful than if he just said, "I'm sorry." His father fights back tears, and he isn't entirely successful. This is probably the sort of thing his wife was better at handling back when she was still around. Where did she go? Did she die? It doesn't matter to the story, but you can feel the reality of it in this scene. A lot of reviews referred to this movie as parody, and that's probably an appropriate label in certain regards, but to me, that word gives the impression of movies like Airplane or Scary Movie, movies that are completely irreverent, and the only thing you get from them is humor. But this movie clearly has more to offer. In some sense, it's a parody of Christmas movies, action movies, and sci-fi horror movies, but it also is those things. When you watch The Thing, part of what keeps you watching is curiosity about the creature. The same is true here. When they're poking and prodding at the elf, you want to know what'll happen if they shoot it. What is it capable of? What does it want? The movie is also just filled with competent, badass characters, which is no surprise looking back at the movie from today, because the director is Jalmari Helander, who went on to make Sisu, sort of a Finnish John Wick who kills Nazis instead of gangsters, starring Jorma Tammila, who plays Rauno in Rare Exports. The adults all feel like they could have palled around with Stallone in Rambo, Schwarzenegger in Predator, or of course, Kurt Russell in The Thing. None of them are fazed by any of the crazy stuff they face in this movie. When this guy gets his ear practically ripped off, he's frustrated of course, but never yells or lets on that he's in excruciating pain. Even the kid is like a more badass version of Kevin McAllister. It's hilarious how he does the classic kid thing of putting on a helmet and hockey pads when a bad guy's on the way. He even makes sure to duct tape cardboard over his butt to protect from the brutal spanking promised by the pages in that book. But in addition to these probably ineffective protections, he also carries around an actual gun his dad gave him. And if you get annoyed in monster movies where the kid tries to warn the parents, but of course they don't listen, you'll love this scene. Everyone is freaking out, so he fires his gun in the air to get their attention. That's when he comes up with the plan of luring the elves with kids in potato sacks. The only thing left I have to say about this movie is I would love to see a sequel. The director has talked about it, but it's been almost 14 years at this point, so it seems unlikely. But you can easily imagine a follow-up with a bigger budget, where they can explore the fallout of shipping almost 200 elves dressed as Santa around the world. The director also emphasizes that Santa never dies. So although budget constraints prevented us actually seeing Santa in the core of that ice block, maybe a sequel would finally reveal his true form. Well, it looks like our time together is nearly at an end. And speaking of time, one thing people often feel around Christmas is nostalgia. You remember the simpler times when being happy was easy, when nothing felt better than unwrapping a present and finding exactly what you were hoping to get. For me, it was the Hanukkah of '96. After 7 nights of small presents I don't even remember, on the 8th night my parents outdid themselves with a little thing called the Nintendo 64. I was so happy, but not only that, I didn't think we were going to get it, so I was surprised too. Nothing can compare to that feeling today. Except maybe when a video unexpectedly does well, so if you want to get me something for Hanukkah this year, like, subscribe, and share this video. And if you're curious why Hanukkah is absent from this video, it's not because there are no Hanukkah horror movies. There actually is one. It came out in 2019 and it's called Hanukkah. Sid Haig plays a killer targeting people who break Judaic law on the holiday. It was one of his final roles before he sadly passed. The thing is, it's not a good movie, and I didn't want to bring up Hanukkah just to beat up on it, especially since it already has such a hard time competing with Christmas. I remember all the playground debates. Christmas, all the cool lights, and way more pop culture. Hanukkah, you know what's better than 1 day of presents? 8. Christmas, yeah, but what kind of gift are you getting on night 1? A number 2 pencil? A debate for another day. For now, let's get back to Christmas. But first, just so you can see why it says Menorahsaurus. Huh? Pretty cool, huh? It wouldn't be right to end a Christmas video without capturing some of that nostalgia. So for this last movie, we're talking about an 80s classic, full of classic movie references, and it's all about a kid getting a present, something called a mogwai. It's Christmas time, and struggling inventor Randall Peltzer needs a gift for his son, Billy. He finds it in a place called Chinatown, a strange creature he's never seen before called Mogwai. The store owner, Mr. Wing, refuses to sell him, but Wing's son thinks he knows better. They need the money. Peltzer leaves with the Mogwai in hand, along with 3 important rules. 1, keep him out of the light. He hates bright light, especially sunlight. It'll kill him. 2, keep him away from water. Don't get him wet. 3, the most important rule, the rule you can never forget. No matter how much he cries or how much he begs, never, never feed him after midnight. Randall explains all this to his son Billy when he gives him the early Christmas present. The small furry creature is a welcome respite. Billy's job at the local bank means spending his days with the likes of Mrs. Deagle, the town's local Scrooge, and Gerald Hopkins, the bank's self-important junior vice president.
It isn't Captain Clip-On.
At least there's also Kate Berenger, the girl he likes. And now, there's Gizmo. That's what Randall's been calling him, and the Mogwai seems to like it. Billy and his new pet get along great. The little guy can sing, play the piano, and even sort of talk. But it isn't long before Billy breaks the rules when his friend Pete knocks over a glass of water and gets the Mogwai wet. What happens next defies science. Fur balls spit from Gizmo's back and grow into 5 new Mogwai, including one they named Stripe for his distinctive mohawk. To learn more about these creatures, Billy consults high school science teacher Mr. Hanson and leaves him with one of the Mogwai for research. That night, there are 2 significant developments. 1, Billy asks out Kate, and she says yes. 2, Billy and Hanson break the most important rule. Sometime after midnight, the Mogwai at the science lab manages to grab what's left of Mr. Hanson's snack. And back home, the clever creatures trick Billy, chewing through the power cord of his clock so the time freezes before midnight. When he checks if it's safe to feed them, he has no idea it's after midnight, until morning when he sees the results. All who partook in the post-midnight snack, all except Gizmo, have cocooned themselves. And we all know what cocoons are for. Transformation. The next day, the first one hatches at Hanson's lab. Billy rushes over to find whatever left that cocoon is a monster because it killed Mr. Hanson. And when he meets it face to face, he sees exactly what Mogwai become when you feed them after midnight. Gremlins. Back home, the rest of the cocoons have hatched, and Gizmo shakes in distress while the gremlins play darts with him as the target. But they quickly set their sights on another, Billy's mother, Lynn, left alone with Randall traveling for an inventors conference. And the gremlins are no match for Lynn. Blender, knife, insecticide, and microwave all prove effective tools for killing gremlins. One nearly gets the better of her until Billy returns in the nick of time. He brings her to a neighbor's place for safety, then takes Gizmo and follows Stripe's footsteps to the YMCA. The gremlin scratches Billy's chest, then dives into the swimming pool. As he spawns an army of gremlins, Billy runs for safety. He tries to warn the cops, including a young Michael Ehrmantraut, but they laugh off his reports of gremlins. Meanwhile, the creatures do what they do best: spread absolute mayhem. They mow down Mr. Futterman and his wife with his own snowplow, launch Mrs. Deagle out her window by modifying her stair lift, and turn an intersection deadly by making all the lights turn green at once. Many of them end up at the bar where Kate works, and she reluctantly serves them, giving way to an all-out gremlin party. Once she realizes their distaste for bright light, she escapes using the flash of a camera and finds Billy waiting for her outside. They escape the mayhem and lay low for a bit, while she tells him how much she hates Christmas. It reminds her of how her father went missing on Christmas Eve when she was 9 years old. It was only a few days later when she noticed the distinct smell of death in her chimney. It was her father, dressed in a Santa suit, having apparently broken his neck while sneaking down for a Christmas surprise. Now, the gremlins have given her one more reason to detest the holiday. When things are quiet, Billy and Kate venture out to find an eerie calm in the wake of the gremlins' mischief. Where did they all go? It'll be light soon. They must have found somewhere dark. The movie theater, they realize. And it's true. They're all in there enjoying a classic, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Billy and Kate quickly devise a plan that would make Lieutenant Aldo Rain proud. They open the gas line and burn the place down. Only Stripe escapes, and as they pursue this final gremlin, the new couple finds a chance to kiss before entering battle. They stage this mortal combat in a local department store, replete with tools fit for a death match: baseball bats, buzzsaws, chainsaws, and even a crossbow. Billy is wounded, and Stripe reaches a fountain to spawn more of his kind, until Gizmo lets in some sunlight, quickly turning the gremlin into nothing but a harmless puddle. When Randall returns home, the family reunites for a quiet evening, only interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Wing. He takes Gizmo back and admonishes the inventor. "I warned you. With Mogwai comes much responsibility, but you didn't listen, and you see what happens. You do with Mogwai what your society has done with all of nature's gifts. You do not understand. You are not ready." But the Mogwai has something to add. "You understand what he says when he speaks to you?" Billy asks. "To hear," Mr. Wing explains, "one has only to listen." And listening closely, Billy hears exactly what the Mogwai has to say. "Bye, Billy." Finally, Mr. Wing offers that perhaps someday Billy will be ready, and until then, the Mogwai will be waiting. Oh, and Randall gives him a Peltzer smokeless ashtray as a token of appreciation and apology, a device that's already become the latest word in technology, after Randall gave one to a guy working at the gas station. Since this movie's a classic, it's hard to find something to say about it which hasn't already been said. But I do come to it from a unique perspective, since I actually watched it for the first time for the purpose of this video. I didn't see it as a kid, so I don't have any particular nostalgia for it. Yet watching it still felt nostalgic. Not only because it's such a product of the 80s, when horror comedies like this were on the rise, including Ghostbusters, which came out the same weekend, but also because, even at the time it came out, it was already a celebration of what came before. It's filled with pop culture references. Right at the beginning, there's Rockin' Ricky's Indiana Jones-inspired billboard, courtesy of producer Steven Spielberg. The TVs frequently have Christmas classics playing throughout the movie. At the Inventors Conference, Randall is intimidated by the caliber of inventions, including Robbie the Robot from 1956's Forbidden Planet. But Gremlins wouldn't be so fondly remembered if it was just a bunch of references. It goes further by also remixing elements from the classics into its own plot, becoming the best sort of parody, where it pokes fun at a genre while also becoming a legitimate entry in that genre. In this case, it's B-horror movies, something perfectly suited for director Joe Dante. Gremlins has all the makings of a cheesy monster movie, creatures that defy science wreak havoc on a town, killing not characters, but caricatures, like the town miser or the local drunk crackpot who complains of gremlins and machines. Though that's not as crazy as it sounds. He's a World War II vet, and that's when the term was popularized because pilots would jokingly blame gremlins for aircraft malfunctions. After that, Roald Dahl brought the term into pop culture. When the true gremlins are unleashed, the movie becomes a showcase for awesome and hilarious creature effects. Oddly, the movie also pays homage to another genre, Christmas movies. But that combination, Christmas and B-movies, isn't as strange as it seems at first glance. Like I said before the recap, Christmas tends to stir up a lot of nostalgia, and in the 80s, the horror sci-fi of the 50s would have already been a source of nostalgia. That's still true today, and now you have the added effect of nostalgia for the 80s themselves. On this movie's status as a Christmas movie, it's not just because it takes place around Christmas, but also because it uses tropes from this genre too. There's the obvious Scrooge parallel with Mrs. Deagle threatening to torture and kill Billy's dog. There's Kate, the character who's lost their Christmas spirit. There's the theme of family, and the movie ends with a moral lesson about responsibility. It even has an opening and closing narration from Randy, giving the movie that classic feel of someone telling you an old Christmas story. There's also the fact that the entire impetus of the movie is a Christmas gift gone awry. On that note, by the way, Gremlins does a great job capturing the feeling of getting a new present. Think back to those times when you got a new toy and you couldn't wait to play with it, explore all the features, and see what it can do. If you're watching this movie for the first time, you'll wonder all the same things about the Mogwai. What can Gizmo do? What happens when he gets wet? And what happens when you feed him after midnight? These questions keep you engaged and remind you what it's like to be a kid on Christmas Day. So it's part nostalgic Christmas movie, part B-horror movie, and much of the comedy comes from contrasting the two. For example, many of the characters, like I said, come off as caricatures. Not just Mrs. Deagle, but even Billy's dad, Randy Peltzer. His inventions are so absurd, but he sells them with a straight face. The fact that his voice is so deep and commanding makes the absurdity even more hilarious. Like the opening scene has him trying to sell Mr. Wing his impractical and barely functioning bathroom helper.
And you push this button. That's no problem. That's absolutely no problem.
Throughout the movie, it's fun to see them introduce more Peltzer gadgets and see how each of them malfunctions. Though I love the Christmas warmth that comes through in the way no one gives him a hard time about it. His wife and son are nothing but supportive and encouraging, which feels like the opposite of what you'd see in a movie today. All that is funny on its own, but it's contrasted against Billy, who just feels like a normal guy. He's like the straight man in a comedy act, against the more eccentric cast around him. There's another sort of contrast too, when the B-horror elements collide with the Christmas side of the movie. In any other Christmas movie, Mrs. Deagle would learn her lesson, rediscover her Christmas spirit, and start being nice to people. In this movie, she gets launched out a window to her death. There are also a couple of dark turns with the Kate character. When she first tells Billy she hates Christmas, she explains that it's not all that unusual.
That's funny, because I always thought everyone was happy during the holidays, no matter what.
Well, most people are, but some aren't. While everybody else is opening up their presents, they're opening up their wrists.
In a movie with such a whimsical tone, her graphic description of people getting depressed around the holidays feels sudden and out of place. It makes you ask, did I just hear what I think I heard? And you can't help but laugh. The movie doubles down later with Kate's monologue about her dad dying in the chimney and them not finding his body until she noticed the smell of his rotting corpse. It's so dark, and it's not like Kate has some kind of character arc where she works through the trauma, so it just sits there as this bizarre, awful thing. In general, there isn't much in the way of character work in this movie. It's much more about the fun of gremlins running around and the creature effects that come with it. The best has to be the bar scene, where all the gremlins cut loose. Some of them play poker, one of them recreates a scene from Flashdance, an homage to composer Michael Sembello, who wrote songs for both movies. Speaking of Flash, there's also this guy. My favorite is the noir gremlin, who just wants to drink, smoke, and brood in the corner, but this guy with puppets won't leave him alone. I find it so funny because you have to wonder, does he genuinely just want to sit in the corner and stay out of the mayhem? Or are the gremlins just learning about the world and mimicking whatever they've picked up from pop culture in the short time they've been alive? It's such a fun scene and a great showcase of the work from special effect and makeup artist Chris Walas. If I have any complaints about this movie, it would be what I said earlier about character work. Kate introduces this dark side early on when she talks about how not everyone likes Christmas, and it's intriguing. It makes you want to spend more time with the character, but she's pretty absent after that until we revisit her at the bar and start working toward an ending. In general, I wouldn't have minded more character development, but I get that's not what the movie is about, and in its place, Gremlins offers a lot of fun, so it's hard to be too mad about it. Hey, it's a classic, I'm glad I finally watched it, and now I can watch the sequel. I guess we'll cover that on next year's Christmas horror special. Well, friends, it's been wonderful spending this creepy Christmas with you. And now that you've seen the darker side of the holiday, the not so jolly old Saint Nick, maybe you can better appreciate the light. Next time you open a present and you're disappointed in yet another pair of socks, maybe instead be thankful you didn't get an orb inscribed with the name Krampus. When you're stuck on the phone with someone who wants to spend too much time catching up this holiday, maybe instead of complaining, be thankful it isn't Billy calling. That's the lesson in all this. And like all good Christmas tales, once you spell out the moral, it's time to wrap things up. Merry Christmas, everyone. Have a safe trip home. And if you see a horned figure with cloven hooves coming your way, well, I hope you've been good all year. But if you want to hedge your bets, one more good deed can't hurt. So, like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more. With that, thank you for watching, and see you on the next One Take.